The ban list dropping right after YCS Houston, which saw an overall very positive reaction, I can't help but get excited for the upcoming format. What does this mean for Dark Magician? Well, to put it bluntly, Fiendsmith being untouched will be far and away the best way to play Dark Magician, and if you need a starting guide on how to play that and what to play when building and constructing a Fiendsmith Dark Magician deck, you can check out my last video where I go over the basis of what the deck could look like. However, with this projected rise in popularity, I could see Bestials regaining heavy traction, which could be a problem for some Fiendsmith cards. And because of that, I'm leaning towards a more Primate heavy list, similar to that in my last video. That being said, the beautiful thing about a start of a new format is that it's all projections and theories, and these theories can aggressively change within weeks and days. In this list, I'll go over how to play Primate Dark Magician and how to play the list to maximize the card choices and card economy to ensure you're playing the list correctly. Starting off the first combo, we will be looking at the standard Dark Magician lines, which are with your copies of Magician's Souls and Magician's Rod. Now remember, throughout these combos, we can utilize Illusion of Chaos to up the consistency of these lines, but essentially, when you see these two cards, you immediately think of, okay, can I get into a card like Red Eyes Dark Dragoon? To which you can, if your other three cards can utilize and help Dragoon be sustain Dragoon and keep applying pressure through Dragoon with these three unknowns, then yes, you can go into Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. However, assuming that these cards are unplayable, this line is significantly more superior because of the multiple avenues you can go into. So what we will do is we'll start off with our copy of Magician's Souls. Magician's Souls will activate its effect in hand to send Dark Magician Girl for cost. We then will special summon our Magician's Souls. We will normal summon our Magician's Rod. Magician's Rod will activate its effect, grabbing you your Soul Servant. You can then link off Magician's Rod into your Blue Eyes Link 1, which is Spirit with Eyes of Blue. And what Spirit with Eyes of Blue will do is it will fetch you your Mausoleum of White. You can then activate your Mausoleum of White targeting either Spirit with Eyes of Blue or Magician's Souls to send your Dark Magician. Now in this example, what you can do is you can stack your deck. Like I said, if you have the cards necessary to establish a game state for yourself that can help utilize a good card to stack off Soul Servant, you can go into this you can go into various different lines and avenues, but like I said, assuming we open absolutely nothing here, we're just trying to hope and draw into more hand traps and disruptions for our opponent's turn. Magician's Souls will activate its effect, sending both Mausoleum of White and Soul Servant to the graveyard to draw two unknowns. And then what we can do is we can have Soul Servant banish itself in grave. So what this line does is establish both bricks in the graveyard so that we can draw another two cards. So in this situation, we have 7 cards in hand, which is pretty good. Now, what we can do is we can link off our copy of Magician's Souls into your Spirit with Eyes of Blue. Now, what these two cards allow us to do is, because we're locked into dragons, we're able to just link those away into a card like Hieratic Seals. Now, Hieratic Seals is a fantastic card because if we end on just this, it's pretty decent, as this is a pretty substantial amount of interruptions. If a few of these cards can be set, you'll set them. You understand the drill. Now, why is Hieratic Seals a fantastic option for Magician's Rod and Magician's Souls? Because Hieratic Seals now opens up a million different avenues that we can go into. With Malice, Ryzeal, Mermail, all taking charge in the format, you can go into a card that does pretty substantial damage to these decks. Assuming we're playing into Ryzeal, which has some light options, some light targets, what we can do is we can activate our copy of Hieratic Seals, sending it to the graveyard to bounce one other card on our opponent's field to their hand. And then with Hieratic Seals in grave, we can use it to summon Fallen of Albaz. Fallen of Albaz will then discard a random card from our hand, fusing itself with, in this example, they have a light target with a light target on our opponent's side of the field to summon your card, a card like Albion the Sanctifier Dragon. Now, what Albion the Sanctifier Dragon is really good at doing is you can activate its effect to summon both, for example, your copy of Dark Magician and to your opponent's side of the field, you could summon Spirit with Eyes of Blue. Now, why is Spirit with Eyes of Blue really good summoning to your opponent's side of the field? It's like a pseudo gimmick puppet. So when this card hits your opponent's side of the field, they are locked into dragons and dragons only. And the only way to get rid of it is if you get rid of the card itself. So what happens in this situation is if your opponent's playing a deck like Banlist or Ryzeal or Mermail, they don't have many dragon options, so this card is very detrimental and can end their turn outright if they don't open a card that can deal with it. Now, the beautiful thing about this example is it can get you Dark Magician in rotation. So if you drew into one of your 7 cards was like a Drill Beam, for example, Drill Beam is now immediately live with a card like Dark Magician. Or if you play cards like Dark Magical Circle, or you drew into Secrets of Dark Magic, things like that. Obviously, you can't fuse with Albion, but if you have a Bestial in hand, or whatever the case is, you can pretty much get value off the Dark Magician being summoned back while floodgating your opponent. Now, the beautiful thing about this line is that with Seals bouncing, summoning back your Fallen of Albaz, this card can hit an unbelievable amount of decks right now, because whether it's, for example, a dark deck, whatever extra deck monster they have, or a light deck in this example, you can go into Albion and or Sanctifier. If you're playing Blue Eyes, for example, the Sanctifier line isn't very good because you summon back the Spirit with Eyes of Blue to their side of the field, which isn't a great option. However, if you grab a card like, if you fuse into a card like Albion, well, this is a fantastic option, because what Albion will allow you to do is essentially fuse off your copy of Dark Magician and, you know, Fallen of Albaz, or whatever the case may be, another dragon that you may control or in your graveyard, to summon a Red Eyes Dark Dragoon to apply pressure that way, which is also very, very strong. Alternatively, another reason for this package and why I'm opting to play it is the biggest question I had was, Matchy, you only play 1 copy of Dark Magician. What happens if it gets banished? Well, in this example, you can summon a card like Lubellion, which can shuffle back your Dark Magician, and bringing it back into rotation is very important. Alternatively, there's a few other very, very interesting lines that can snowball advantage for yourself down that I can get into later on in the video. But essentially what Seals and Fallen of Albaz does is it can also get you access into Magnema if you need to see your engine, or if Fallen of Albaz isn't the option for the current game state. There are multiple avenues, multiple cards in your deck that it can grab. For example, like your Barrel Dragon, Bestial Baldrake, Druid Swarm, Magnamut, etc, 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 which can also apply a decent amount of pressure to your opponent, as well as generating some sort of follow-up for yourself. So, in addition to this, a card like Albion the Branded Dragon, when you fuse into a card like this, and if this card does get sent to the graveyard, what it does do is it can grab you access to a card like Branded Regain, for the potential follow-up, which is very, very important. And with Branded Regain on the board, you no longer need to draw into your copy of Bestial Lubellion to get it online. So having a card like Fallen of Albaz link everything together is very, very effective. And if we are playing a card like Heraldic Seals Turbo, this is very important. I will get into a few more alternative ways on how we can really, really maximize this combo, but essentially this is the baseline of what this deck wants to do. Now remember, this all starts off Magician's Rod and Magician's Souls. If Magician's Rod and Magician's Souls is on the board or in your hand, essentially what these 2 cards allow us to do is establish Heraldic Seals, any one of these cards, along with floodgating your opponent with a card like Albion, which is kind of what this entire combo was spawned around. And if you give them a card like Spirit with Eyes of Blue, you essentially stop your opponent from playing for a turn, allowing you to beat them on the crackback. And this all stems back and goes back into why this deck is so efficient in the grind game. This is a grindy control style deck, which is kind of the basis and how Dark Magician wanted to play back in 2017, which is really interesting, and it's a nice way to pay homage to how the deck wanted to play originally. Although this deck is marketed as Seals Turbo, at its foundation, it is a control style that revolves around Primate Lordy Load. However, what people fail to understand when I presented this idea and this deck's idea is that people anticipate that because we play Primate Lordy Load with the Dark Magician cards, this deck revolves around Drill Beam as being its primary form of disruption, which kind of is true and isn't. If we open up with nothing, Drill Beam is a fantastic card, and the way the Primate engine essentially allows our grind game to establish itself and essentially have infinite grind game That's why this engine is so good. However, what people don't seem to realize is that there's a lot of different layers that the Primate card allows the Dark Magician engine to go into, which is very, very interesting. In combination with Magician's Souls and Primate Lordy Load, in this example, we do need to open one of Magician's Rod or Soul Servant. For this example, because we utilize Magician's Rod in the last combo, we won't use it, and we'll just use our copy of Soul Servant. So this is 3-card combo. However, like I said, it's very accessible because you can utilize a card like Magician's Rod. Illusion of Chaos also does go into this. Or if you don't have Primate Lordy Load, you can go with Barrel Dragon and Soul Servant instead of this. So although this combo seems very difficult to get into because it is a 3-card combo, the combo is incredibly accessible with the amount of cards and engines pieces that we play within the list. So for this example, we will be starting off with Magician's Souls. Magician's Souls will send our copy of Dark Magician Girl from the deck to the graveyard, summoning itself. One other thing to note, the Primate cards do allow Dark Magician Girl and Dark Magician to get into rotation very, very comfortably, giving you your maximum value off Soul Servant, which is very important. We then activate our Primate Lordy Load. Primate Lordy Load will add our Barrel Dragon from our deck to our hand, which we will then normal summon. Now, in this example, if we did open up Rod, we would just go straight for our Drill Beam, which is just as good. But because we have Barrel Dragon, we might as well utilize it. So Barrel Dragon will set your copy of Drill Beam from the deck to the graveyard. Something to note, we are going to be going into Mausoleum of White here. However, if we did open up Mausoleum of White, Magician's Souls can get a draw 2 here by sending your copy of Primate Drill Beam to draw a card with Mausoleum, right? And then you get 2 cards, and the beautiful thing is that Drill Beam will reset itself because we control a Primate monster. However, in this example, we didn't open Mausoleum, so we do have to go into the more elongated route of making sure all our cards resolve correctly. So we will be linking off Barrel Dragon into your copy of Spirit with Eyes of Blue, and Spirit of Eyes of Blue will essentially grab you your copy of Mausoleum of White. We will activate Mausoleum of White, sending Dark Magician from your deck to the graveyard. And now, like I said, we have both bricks in rotation, which is fantastic. Here, Magician's Souls will send your copy of Mausoleum of White, and you will chain Soul Servant to stack your deck with Secrets of Dark Magic. Now, this is very, very important because on the follow-up in our opponent's turn, Secrets of Dark Magic will be an unbelievable disruption. So we'll draw into our Secrets of Dark Magic. And here we will activate, we will link off Magician's Souls into your second Spirit with Eyes of Blue and get you access into your Hieratic Seals. What you can do now is you can activate Soul Servant Engrave to essentially draw 2 free cards. We can draw 2 free cards, which is pretty decent, and then we will set our Secrets of Dark Magic and we'll activate Primate Lordy Load to summon your Dark Magician from the graveyard. So this is kind of the end board you have. You have Primate Drill Beam and Secrets of Dark Magic going into your opponent's turn with 4 cards in hand, which is, you know, pretty effective if I do say so myself. So on our opponent's turn, now prior to this, we did go into the Sanctifier line, which can lock out, which can lock your opponent from special summoning in the correct matchup. However, because I already showcased that, I do want to showcase a different line, which is very interesting also. Now, assuming our opponent enters their turn and begins playing, what we can do is we can utilize our Primate Drill Beam as one form of disruption. We then can activate Hieratic Seals as our second form of disruption, and essentially Hieratic Seals will summon our Fallen of Albaz. If, for example, we play an opponent that can't utilize that doesn't utilize light or dark monsters or fusion monsters, we can just go into our copy of Bestial Druiswarm or Bestial Magnamut as a form of interruption. Because if we summon, for example, Bestial Druiswarm, so these are essentially the 3 cards that we want to go into off Hieratic Seals in this particular instance. So if we don't have any follow-up, Bestial Magma is the correct choice because it gets us a dragon in the end phase. Secondly, Bestial Druiswarm is a fantastic option if our opponent doesn't play anything that Fallen of Albaz can fuse into. So because Bestial Druiswarm is on the board, we can then activate Secrets of Dark Magic, fusing both together into a Dragoon, and then Bestial Druiswarm will end up popping a monster on our opponent's turn, which is also fantastic. However, in this example, what I do want to do is I want to get pretty creative with a card like Fallen of Albaz, and what Fallen of Albaz allows us to do is Fallen of Albaz will fuse with an opponent's monster, into a card like either Mirror Jade, Albion, or Lubellion. In this example, we'll be going with a card like Lubellion. Or in this example, we'll be utilizing a card like Albion the Branded Dragon. Now, the beautiful thing here is what we can do is Albion will activate its effect. We can chain Secrets of Dark Magic to fuse both Dark Magician and Albion to summon your first copy of Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. And then Albion will activate its effect, fusing itself or fusing Dark Magician and Spirit with Eyes of Blue by banishing them to the graveyard to essentially summon your second copy of Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. Now, obviously, this isn't ideal. This is a situation where you're going to be closing out the game on the next turn because you lose access to a card like Dark Magician, which isn't fantastic. However, if you do want to play 2 copies of Dark Magician, this line is a lot better. But we do have access to 2 copies of Red Eyes Dark Dragoon with 3 cards in hand because I forgot to discard off Fallen of Albaz. So this is kind of one alternative way what we can utilize Hieratic Seal's Fallen of Albaz. So this is not only this is one interruption with Drill Beam. This is a second interruption with a Hieratic Seal's Bounce and Fallen of Albaz fusing with our opponent's monster. So that's 3 interruptions, and then we have 2 Red Eyes Dark Dragoon negates after all of this. So these 2 cards can help us essentially close out the game right then and then with 3 cards in hand. Alternatively, if it does come down to it, in the end phase, because Albion is in our graveyard, we can set our copy of Branded Regain, which is also very, very good. Now, alternative to this, we can go into multiple different avenues. If you wish to keep your Dark Magician live, you can go into Lubellion, assuming that your opponent is playing the correct fusion materials. Alternatively, going into a card like Mirror Jade is also fantastic, and or a card like Albion the Sanctifier Dragon. Like I previously stated in the previous example. If we have a monster in hand, another alternative that we can do is go into a card like Guardian Chimera. Bringing it back to this exact game state, how we just activated Primate Drill Beam, another option what we can do is utilize a card like Guardian Chimera with Hieratic Seals bouncing to bounce a card back to your opponent's hand, summoning your Bestial Druid Swarm, and then what we can do is we can activate Secrets of Dark Magic if we have a monster in hand to fuse these 2 and the monster in hand to summon a card like Guardian Chimera, which not only replaces a card in its hand but also gives you 3 monster destructions, 2 off the Guardian Chimera and then 1 off the Bestial Druid Swarm. And what all this does is, alternative to the Red Eyes Dark Dragoon line, we still have Dark Magician Engrave. We can reset our Primate Drill Beam and getting back our Barrel Dragon, which is all form of different disruptions for the grind game with 4 cards in hand still if you do have hand traps, for example. So like I said, the Primate cards do offer a bunch of disruptions that can go into your opponent's turn and into your opponent's board. And I just feel like the Primate engine within Dark Magician and Hieratic Seals does a lot more than just setting up, for example, a Drill Beam or 1 Hieratic Seals bounce and then a Magnamut Search in the end phase. This is a combo that I did go into in my previous video, and it's just about how Illusion of Chaos by itself does get you access into Hieratic Seals. Like I said in that video previously, if you just opened Illusion of Chaos with 4 blanks, this didn't really do anything. However, in this situation, you can get a lot more value from just your Illusion of Chaos. So we'll start by activating Illusion of Chaos, grabbing your copy of Magician's Rod. Magician's Rod, you then put back whatever you need from your hand to your deck. Deck. You then normal summon Magician's Rod to grab your copy of Soul Servant. Now, whatever you put back, it doesn't really matter, but it's essential and it's vital that you keep your Illusion of Chaos in hand for this example. You want to link off your copy of Magician's Rod. Magician's Rod to the graveyard will grab you access to your Spirit with Eyes of Blue. Spirit with Eyes of Blue will essentially grab you your Mausoleum of White, which you then activate, targeting your Spirit with Eyes of Blue to send your Dark Magician from your deck to your graveyard. Now, it's very important here because you are locked into dragons, so you're very restricted with what you want to do. However, you can utilize Soul Servant to stack your copy of Timaeus the United Dragon from your deck to the top of your deck. You then banish your Soul Servant, drawing into your Timaeus the United Dragon, which you will then pitch your Illusion of Chaos to summon it. Because it is a dragon, you then link these two away into your Hieratic Seals. Now, typically this isn't really much, but on your opponent's turn, this is quite a bit. You can then activate your Hieratic Seals to bounce a card your opponent controls, and then summoning your Fallen of Albaz, like in the previous combos. And when Fallen of Albaz hits the field, you can essentially choose which direction you want to go into based on what your opponent is playing. If your opponent is playing, for example, light deck, you go into Albion to get into your Dragoon. If you're playing a dark deck, you go into Lubellion. If they already established an extra deck monster or two extra deck monsters, you just hard make a Mirror Jade. And essentially here, like in that previous combo, you essentially pick and choose which direction you want to go into, whether it is the Albion line to lock your opponent out of summoning monsters, except for dragon monsters, by giving them Spirit with Eyes of Blue. Alternatively, you can go into your Albion and or Lubellion, which does give you access to your 2 copies of Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, or you can just hard make your copy of Mirror Jade using an opponent's extra deck monsters, which is a layer of interruptions. So you have quite a decent amount of avenues you can go into, and this all stems from just Illusion of Chaos, which is something that we never really had access to in the past, right? So it's Illusion of Chaos and 3 random cards in hand can get you quite a bit of disruptions and or follow-up, which is very important for the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And this essentially will guarantee that what would have been a brick does allow you to at least compete for a 3rd and maybe potentially a 4th turn down the line. Having everything come together is also very important when it comes to showcasing what a deck can do. In this example, I'm just going to be showcasing how all these engines interact with one another to establish a game state for yourself. So in this example, we open up a little bit of Bestial Lubellion, Magician Souls, Primate cards, and everything like that. And what the point of this is to kind of showcase the interesting interactions you can have. For example, this hand allows us to get us both our bricks in rotation and in the graveyard with Mausoleum and Dark Magician Girl, Dark Magician. With Magician Souls. And on the back of this, we have very interesting interactions, like, for example, because we have Primate Barrel Dragon, we're able to send Drill Beam off Magician Souls to get a free card and free card advantage in our hand, which is very, very important. And the reason for this is that Drill Beam, because Barrel Dragon's on the field, Drill Beam resets itself. So because of this, we kind of maintain that card economy while establishing a board for ourselves, which is very important in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially when you're playing a rogue deck like Dark Magician. In this example, we'll activate Bestial Magnemite, sending Dark Magician Souls to essentially get us a dragon in the end phase, and allowing us to grab Bestial Lubellion, which puts our branded regain on the board and into rotation, which is going to be very important later on our opponent's turn when and if we summon a card like Albion the Branded Dragon. So here, to just end off, to round off this end board, we are just going to link off our Spirit with Eyes of Blue and our Barrel Dragon into Hieratic Seals, keeping Bestial Lubellion. It doesn't matter what we wanted to keep. We could have kept the Barrel Dragon. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. But essentially here, we'll just round off our turn by activating the Set Lordy Load, grabbing our another copy of Barrel Dragon just for card advantage, and then summoning our Dark Magician. And in the end phase here, we grab our Bestial Druiswarm off the back of Magnemite and pass turn to our opponent. Going into our opponent's board, as far as a hypothetical is concerned, we can start off by just using our first interruption, which is a card like Primate Drill Beam, to negate a card and banish it. And then we could utilize Hieratic Seals to bounce a card back to our opponent's hand, summoning Fallen of Albaz. Fallen of Albaz would discard a random card in our hand, doesn't matter which one. We'll send Magician Souls, and this will allow us to fuse into any one of the branded boss monsters. For this example, we'll just utilize Albion and or Lubellion, depending on what our opponent has on the board. In this example, we'll be utilizing Albion because when we banish Dark Magician, we're essentially able to recycle it because we have branded regain on the board, which is very, very important. So in this example, we do have access to Red Eyes Dark Dragoon and a free card in hand off the back of Branded Regain without losing access to Dark Magician in the grind game, which is very, very important. We can then utilize Bestial Druiswarm as an interruption, and then we have Ghost Ogre as an interruption, along with a Red Eyes Dark Dragoon negate. Obviously, these combos and ideas are just the tip of a very layered iceberg. There are a million different avenues you could take each one of these lines, and I will go over them in a future video. but this is just an idea to get the conversation started on what I think the most optimal way to play Primate Dark Magician really is. Thank you for watching, and if you have any combos or ideas you want to share, let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, bye.